Picture this. You're walking your plantation early in the morning. The sun is, just starting to cut through the mist, and you're looking up at the canopy anticipating this massive harvest.
Right, the perfect start to the day.
Exactly. But then you look down at your boots,
Mm.
and the ground around the base of your palms is it's covered in perfectly good premature flowers and freshly set fruit.
Oh, man. That is one of the most frustrating sights in agriculture.
It really is. You're staring at this silent yield killer happening right at the biological level, and it's stealing your total tons per hectare before the season even truly begins.
Yeah, it's brutal.
So today we're going to unpack the biological mechanics behind why your palms are dropping their potential. And more importantly, we're going to translate that physiology into an actionable field routine to stop the shed.
Right into practical steps.
Exactly. And stick around, because near the end of this deep dive, we're going to reveal the ultimate key takeaway for securing your yield, and it relies on a timing shift that, well, most farmers get completely backward. Welcome to another podcast episode brought to you by AGS Agriculture Global Solutions, where we discuss sustainable oil palm cultivation topics.
So, to understand the root of this issue, we're drawing from a highly detailed review paper. It's titled Flowers and Fruits, Abortion in Fruit Trees, Causes and Solutions. It was published in 2023 in the IOP Conference Series, Earth and Environmental Science.
Right.
And, the research looks broadly at orchard crops, but the underlying plant physiology applies directly to what we see in palm cultivation. So we're going to distill these clinical findings into clear field instructions.
Yeah, our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to take those complex biological mechanisms, the enzymes, the hormones, vascular responses, and turn them into a basic care routine. Because whether you're a novice managing a newly planted block or, an expert farmer looking to fine-tune your mature operations, the goal is long-term orchard health.
Yeah.
But we have to start by reading the plant correctly, right?
Right. Before we can stop the fruit from dropping, we really need to determine if the palm is actually in danger or if it's just, executing its natural biological programming.
Right, because not all flower and fruit drop is a crisis.
Exactly. The literature draws a very sharp line between what's called natural thinning and abnormal abortion.
Yeah.
And, the sheer scale of natural thinning can be shocking if you aren't prepared for it.
Oh, absolutely.
A perfectly healthy plant might drop up to 90% of its excess flowers.
90%, that's huge.
It is. It naturally forms this massive abundance of blossoms as a sort of reproductive insurance policy. But internally, the plant's metabolic system is running the math. It knows it simply doesn't have the soil moisture or the stored carbohydrates or even the structural space to support every single flower to full maturity.
Right. If it actually tried to sustain 100% of those flowers, you'd end up with just a huge volume of tiny, commercially useless fruit.
Exactly, just thousands of tiny fruits.
So the palm is ruthlessly culling the excess early on so it can channel its water and nutrients into a smaller, healthier, and much heavier number of fruits. It's optimizing the bunch for overall weight and quality.
That's a great way to put it, optimization.
But, if 90% is just the baseline of natural thinning, it really raises the question of when a farmer should actually start worrying.
Right, and that shift from optimization to crisis is what the researchers classify as abnormal abortion. And this is driven entirely by physiological stress.
Okay.
Instead of just shedding the weakest or the unpollinated flowers, the plant starts dropping things indiscriminately. It sheds large, healthy flowers, and it drops newly set fruits that the vascular system really should be fully supporting.
So it's not being efficient anymore.
Exactly. This is not the plant managing its food supply efficiently. This is the plant panicking, right? It's shutting down reproductive efforts just to keep its core vegetative systems alive. And every piece of fruit dropped during abnormal abortion is a direct subtraction from your total tons per hectare.
Yeah, that's the silent yield killer right there.
Yeah.
I was reading through the section on how the plant actually physically detaches the fruit, and it doesn't just wither and fall off randomly. There's a highly specific biological mechanism at play.
Right, the abscission layer.
Yes. At the base of the flower or the fruit stem, right where it connects to the bunch holder, there's this specialized zone of cells. It functions almost like a planned demolition zone on a bridge.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, think of it like you have this vital structural bridge connecting the main plant to the developing fruit, and it's transporting all the heavy traffic of water and carbohydrates.
Right, the supply line.
Yeah.
And when the palm experiences severe stress, it basically chemically detonates that
It
bridge.
just blows it up.
Exactly. It activates specific localized enzymes, primarily pectinase and cellulase. Now, pectin is essentially the biological mortar that holds plant cell walls together.
Right.
So when pectinase and cellulase flood that abscission layer, they actively dissolve that mortar. The cell walls break down, the vascular tissue that rode on our bridge is completely severed.
Wow.
And the connection becomes so structurally weak that, a light breeze or just the mere weight of the fruit itself causes it to separate and drop.
And what stands out to me is that once those enzymes are released and the mortar starts dissolving, there's no way to rebuild it, right?
No, not at all. It's completely irreversible.
The plant has committed to the drop. So as field advisors, our entire goal is to stop the demolition sequence before the plant ever decides to hit the detonator.
Exactly.
So what are the physiological triggers that actually arm this system?
Well, it fundamentally comes down to a battle between two primary plant hormones, auxins and ethylene.
Okay, auxins and ethylene.
Right. Auxins are the growth hormones. They signal the plant to divide cells, expand tissues, and, crucially, actively hold on to its fruit. Ethylene, on the other hand, is the stress and ripening hormone.
Right, the stress signal.
Yeah. So when a palm is healthy, well-hydrated, and metabolically balanced, auxin levels remain incredibly high across that abscission layer. The presence of auxin acts as a chemical block. It actively suppresses the production of cellulose.
Ah, so auxin is the structural reinforcement keeping the bridge safe.
Exactly. But the moment a severe stress event occurs, whether that's a sudden drought, intense heat, or starvation, the plant's internal auxin production just plummets.
It drops off.
Right. And without the auxin to suppress it, ethylene production spikes dramatically. The ethylene then acts as the direct signal to synthesize those demolition enzymes, pectinase and cellulose. The mortar dissolves and the fruit aborts.
So if ethylene is the detonator, then resource depletion and stress are what actually arm the bomb.
That's exactly it.
Meaning, the most critical step to prevent abnormal abortion isn't treating the dropping fruit. I mean, that's too late. It's giving the tree exactly what it needs before the stress event even materializes. Which brings us to proactive seasonal care, specifically pruning and nutrition.
Right, getting ahead of it. The research emphasizes moderate winter pruning as a foundational step. You're managing the plant's structural and metabolic load capacity long before the vulnerable flowering stage begins.
Okay, so clearing things out early.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By clearing out dead or unproductive fronds, you improve airflow and sunlight penetration. This maximizes the plant's ability to photosynthesize and store carbohydrates. You are physically setting the stage so the palm doesn't, overextend its energy budget and panic when the reproductive phase demands massive amounts of resources.
Yeah, and I really want to focus heavily on the nutritional side of that energy budget because the natural instinct in the field is to push fertilizer exactly when the plant seems to be working the hardest.
Oh, yeah, we see that all the time.
Right. You walk the plantation, you see a massive flush of flowers developing, and the instinct is to apply a heavy dose of nitrogen to feed those blossoms. Like, give the palm a massive energy buffet right when it needs it. But the literature highlights that this is actually one of the most destructive misconceptions in orchard management.
It really is. Applying excessive nitrogen during the active flowering period is completely counterproductive because of how nitrogen dictates plant behavior. A massive influx of nitrogen acts as a signal for the plant to push rapid vegetative growth.
So it shifts gears completely.
Right. Instead of channeling energy into fortifying the flowers and setting the fruit, the palm suddenly diverts its carbohydrates into making new vegetative tissue.
It abandons the reproductive effort just to build more leaves. And it gets worse at the physical level too, right?
Absolutely. The rapid forced growth actually causes physical weakness in the newly forming tissues, specifically in the neck of the flower attached to the stem. The plant is building tissue too fast to reinforce it properly.
So going back to our analogy, you're essentially constructing a very weak, flimsy bridge.
Precisely. The flowers will simply break off because the vascular connection is too fragile to support their own weight once they start developing into actual fruit.
Wow. So you think you're feeding the fruit, but you're actually sabotaging the structural integrity of the stem. It's a fascinating look at how timing overrides the actual nutrient itself.
Timing is everything.
Right. So the correct timing for nitrogen application is 1 to 2 weeks before flowering begins. You apply it early so the plant can absorb, process, and synthesize those nutrients into a strong, stable biological structure.
Exactly.
And by the time the blossoms open, the heavy lifting is done, And the nitrogen is already integrated into a robust vascular system that can actually hold the weight of the incoming fruit.
Yes, the focus just has to be on proactive infrastructure, not reactive feeding. And while nitrogen manages the overall vegetative and structural growth, the trace elements are just as critical for directly managing that hormone balance we discussed earlier.
Right, the auxins and ethylene.
Right. The literature specifically points to zinc and boron. Zinc deficiency has a direct correlation with increased flower and fruit abortion. And this is because zinc is a crucial biological precursor to the synthesis of natural auxins.
So without enough zinc in the system, the plant literally cannot manufacture the auxin it needs to reinforce the abscission layer and block the ethylene.
It's biologically incapable of holding onto the fruit.
Wow. And what about boron?
Well, boron plays an essential role in cell wall synthesis and membrane integrity. It's the core component of that biological mortar we talked about. It ensures that the pollen tubes grow correctly during pollination and that the newly formed cells in the fruit stem are physically resilient.
And how do we get those into the plant effectively?
The most effective delivery mechanism for these specific trace elements is applying them via foliar spray directly onto the canopy, and again, just before the flowering stage. Foliar application bypasses potential soil lockup issues and delivers the trace elements directly to the developing tissues where they're needed most urgently.
That makes a lot of sense. And by the way, relying on foliar sprays for targeted corrections doesn't replace the need for an optimized root environment. Soil testing for acidity and overall nutrient content is absolutely essential, and you should always incorporate leaf testing when monitoring these specific nutrient levels throughout the season.
Oh, 100%.
You just can't properly manage a baseline you aren't measuring.
That's a great rule of thumb. And once the nutritional baseline is secured and the pruning is done, the plant is in the strongest possible position. But, physiology is always at the mercy of the environment.
Mother Nature always gets a vote.
Always. Even a perfectly fed palm can have its internal systems overridden by severe weather. The literature documents a specific wave of physiological shedding known as the June drop or summer abortion.
Right, the environmental stress factors here are really complex. I was reviewing the data on the June drop, and what struck me is that the plant isn't necessarily just surrendering to the peak daytime heat. It's the extreme thermal whiplash between scorching daytime temperatures and significantly cooler night temperatures that causes the internal panic.
Yeah, that whiplash is devastating. The massive fluctuation in temperature violently disrupts the plant's metabolic rhythm. During extreme daytime heat, the plant closes its stomata, the tiny pores on the leaves, to prevent total moisture loss.
Which halts photosynthesis completely.
Right. But the high temperatures also increase the plant's respiration rate, meaning it is burning through its stored carbohydrates at an accelerated pace just to stay alive without producing any new energy.
So it's starving and suffocating itself.
Pretty much. This severe carbohydrate deficit signals a survival crisis, dropping auxin levels and spiking ethylene. The palm decides it just cannot afford the energetic cost of fruit development, and the abscission layer detonates.
Boom. Bridge gone. And we obviously can't control the temperature fluctuations or, put a shade cloth over an entire plantation. So our only defense mechanism against heat stress is managing the internal hydration of the palm.
Exactly.
Irrigation management is the primary lever we have, but the research points out that irrigation during the flowering phase is a highly sensitive double-edged sword.
It's very tricky. The extremes on both ends of the watering spectrum lead to the exact same catastrophic result: total yield drop. If you severely underwater during intense heat, the palm dehydrates, the internal sap flow thickens, and it aborts the fruit to conserve what little moisture remains.
Right.
But the reflex to panic and over-irrigate is equally destructive. If you heavily flood the soil profile in response to a heat wave, you raise the ground moisture to a level where you displace all the air pockets in the soil.
You completely remove the oxygen and suffocate the root system.
Exactly. When roots are deprived of oxygen, they shift into anaerobic respiration. They physically cannot take up water or nutrients, regardless of how wet the soil is. The plant registers this sudden inability to pull resources as an immediate physiological crisis.
Even though it's sitting in water.
Exactly. The suffocated roots send a massive chemical stress signal up the trunk, flooding the canopy with ethylene, and the flowers and fruit fall. Palms are remarkably sensitive to root suffocation during their reproductive phases.
Man, it really is the ultimate Goldilocks scenario in field management. Too dry, they abort. Too wet, They suffocate and abort.
Yeah, you have to hit the sweet spot.
So the strict field instruction drawn from this physiological reality is to front-load your hydration. You must provide abundant, deep irrigation before the flowering begins to completely optimize the soil profile and ensure the deep roots have a moisture reserve. But the moment you are during the open flowering and early fruit setting phase, you have to heavily minimize your watering. Maintain just enough surface moisture to prevent a total dry out, but absolutely avoid flooding the root zones while those fragile reproductive processes are actively happening.
Because regulating the moisture preserves the oxygen balance in the soil, which keeps the ethylene levels quiet.
Exactly. And there's a secondary physical rule for managing heat stress out in the fields. When it's time to harvest other mature bunches, or if your crews are doing any manual canopy maintenance, it must be restricted to the early morning hours.
This is such a crucial point.
Yeah, during peak daytime temperatures, the plant's internal turgor pressure, the water pressure inside the cells, is heavily compromised as it fights the heat. The stems become slightly flaccid and much more susceptible to mechanical damage. If you're handling fruit bunches or moving fronds when the plant is already heat-stressed, the vascular connections are practically begging to snap.
Right, the physical resilience of the plant drops in tandem with its metabolic stress. And that vulnerability brings us to the final major trigger for abnormal abortion. We've managed the nutrition, the timing, and the soil oxygen, but external biological threats will still induce a massive drop. Pests.
Yeah, the bugs always find a way.
They do. And for palm cultivators, the literature singles out the lesser date moth as a primary instigator of early fruit fall.
Okay, let's break down the life cycle of this specific threat. Because the damage isn't random, the moth heavily targets the fruit during its most metabolically active growth phases.
Right, we're looking at 3 distinct physiological stages.
Right, the threat begins during the early hapabuck stage when the newly pollinated fruits are just tiny spherical nodes undergoing rapid cell division.
Yep.
And then it continues aggressively right through the Kimry stage, which is the green phase where the fruit is rapidly expanding, highly vascularized, and full of moisture. And the vulnerability persists into the early Kalal stage, right as the fruit starts to change color and build sugar content.
And the moth specifically targets these stages because the tissue is tender and the water and carbohydrate content is rapidly concentrating. It's the perfect food source.
So as a field advisor, what are you training your teams to look for? It's not just the presence of flying moths, right?
No. You're looking for the specific localized damage on the anatomy of the fruit bunch. You need to pull down early stage bunches and inspect the perianth, that's the small protective cap that physically connects the top of the fruit to the stem strand.
Okay, the perianth cap.
Right. The larvae of the lesser date moth will bore a distinct tiny entry hole right underneath that perianth cap.
And to connect this back to our earlier physiology, when the larvae bore into that connection point, they're doing two things simultaneously. First, they're physically chewing through the vascular tissue, mechanically severing the bridge that supplies the fruit.
Right, structural damage.
But more importantly, the physical wound itself triggers a massive localized chemical response. The damaged tissue immediately releases wound-induced ethylene.
Yes. The plant detects the structural compromise and the pest invasion, spikes the local ethylene production, and effectively finishes the job the moth started by activating the abscission layer. The fruit is chemically aborted.
Just a cascading failure. And there's a secondary visual cue that this specific demolition has occurred, which is the color of the dropped fruit on the ground.
That's right.
If the drop is purely related to water stress or natural thinning, the fruit usually retains its normal stage color as it falls. But if you see dropped fruit that has prematurely oxidized into a strange reddish-brown or dark bronze color, that is a prime indicator of an internal tissue wound caused by a localized infestation.
Yeah, the bronze discoloration is a dead giveaway. And if you identify those boreholes under the perianth or spot that bronze discoloration on the ground, the action step is immediate. You must initiate a targeted spray program. Apply specific, approved insecticides directly to the fruit bunches and the entire palm head to halt the larval boring cycle. If you miss this window during the Kimry stage, the wound-induced ethylene will systematically clear the bunch of its yield.
And while we're discussing the physical integrity of the bunches, we have to talk about manual canopy care. I see this out in the plantations frequently. When your teams are organizing the developing fruit bunches, or when they have to bend the bunch holder down to position it for better growth and eventual harvest, the handling must be incredibly deliberate and gentle.
Absolutely. The mechanical strain applied to the bunch holder is critical.
If a worker roughly twists the bunch or bends the holder too sharply and causes a hard kink in that thick stem, they are physically replicating exactly what the cellulase enzyme does at the cellular level.
They're severing the bridge themselves.
Exactly. A hard kink crushes the vascular system. You cut off the internal highway of water and carbohydrates instantly. The palm won't even have the time or the need to send a stress hormone. You've just mechanically aborted your own fruit.
Yeah.
It is an entirely self-inflicted reduction of your tons per hectare. Gentle, progressive handling of the bunch holder is mandatory.
It's all about minimizing any action, chemical, environmental, or physical, that signals to the palm that its reproductive efforts are compromised.
So we've unpacked the biochemistry of the abscission layer, the critical timing of nitrogen, the dangers of thermal whiplash and root suffocation, and the wound responses triggered by the lesser date moth. We promised you the ultimate key takeaway for securing your yield and raising your total tons per hectare, and it all synthesizes into this.
Let's hear it.
True success in palm cultivation is not about chasing short-term yield spikes with sudden reactive chemical dumps. You cannot just throw a massive dose of nitrogen or water at a flowering palm and expect it to magically force the fruit to hold. The ultimate key is emphasizing long-term orchard health through proactive, seasonal timing.
Yes, time.
It's about building the structural and biochemical infrastructure of the palm weeks before it actually needs to perform under stress. Apply your nitrogen before flowering to build a strong stem, not during flowering when it will trigger a vegetative push. Prune in the winter to manage the metabolic load. Hydrate deeply before the blossoms open, and then back off the water to protect the soil oxygen. You are setting the biological stage so perfectly that the palm never experiences the physiological panic required to produce ethylene.
We're maintaining that high oxygen environment by systematically removing the triggers for stress.
Exactly. To put this into practice immediately, we have two main actions for you to execute when you walk your plantation tomorrow morning. First, physically inspect your irrigation lines and evaluate your soil moisture profiles in your flowering blocks. Ensure you are not accidentally overwatering those specific palms and suffocating the root zones.
Crucial step.
And second, pull down a few early-stage Habakkuk or Kimry bunches and inspect them closely. Look right under the perianth cap for those tiny larval boreholes and check the ground for any reddish-brown signs of pest-induced abortion.
Excellent. And I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to consider as you review your agronomy plans for the season. Think deeply about how any synthetic plant growth regulators, or PGRs, you might be utilizing are interacting with your baseline management practices.
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Right. Are your palms currently healthy, well pruned, and properly timed on nutrition so that they produce enough natural auxins to hold onto their fruit independently? Or is your environmental management perhaps slightly suffocated roots or a late fertilizer application forcing them to produce stress hormones, requiring you to constantly fight against the palm's own internal signals? You are the conductor of a very complex biological orchestra out in the field. Make sure your timing is sending the exact right signals for growth.
Thanks for listening.